What if the most decisive moment of World War II wasn't a grand offensive, but a desperate, freezing gamble that nearly shattered the entire Allied command and almost gave Adolf Hitler exactly what he needed to change the course of history? In December 1944, the forests of the Ardennes in Belgium and Luxembourg were silent, buried under snow, and deceptively calm. Allied commanders, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, believed the war was nearly over. Germany was crumbling. The Eastern Front was collapsing. Victory felt inevitable. But deep in the cold shadows of those frozen woods, Hitler was secretly assembling the largest German offensive operation since the fall of France in 1940. A last, brutal, all-or-nothing thrust designed not just to win a battle, but to split the Allied armies in two, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies into a humiliating negotiated peace. What happened next would test every general, every soldier, and every ounce of human courage in ways that history books rarely capture with their full, terrifying weight. If you've ever wondered what real leadership looks like under impossible pressure, you're in exactly the right place. Subscribe to this channel right now, hit that like button, and share this video with someone who loves history, because what you're about to hear is one of the most dramatic, emotionally raw, and strategically fascinating stories ever to come out of the Second World War. And when you finish watching, drop a comment telling us one thing you didn't know about the Battle of the Bulge. Your answers always inspire our next story. On the morning of December 16th, 1944, more than 200,000 German soldiers and nearly 600 tanks surged through the Ardennes, shattering the thinly held American lines in a front stretching over 85 miles. The attack was called Operation Walk am Rhein. Watch on the Rhine, a deliberately deceptive name designed to suggest offensive preparations rather than offensive intent. The Americans stationed there, many of them green troops or exhausted veterans pulled back for rest, had almost no warning. The 106th Infantry Division, freshly arrived in Europe and barely settled into their positions, was hit with devastating force. Within days, two entire regiments, approximately 8,000 men, were surrounded and forced to surrender, representing one of the largest mass captures of American soldiers since the Civil War. Panic rippled through the Allied rear areas. Supply depots were set ablaze to prevent capture, roads clogged with retreating soldiers and terrified civilians. And at the very center of the storm, in the crossroads town of Bastogne, a small but ferocious American force was about to make history. Bastogne was not just a town. It was a vital knot of 7 major roads in the Belgian highlands, and whoever controlled it controlled movement through the entire region. General Troy Milton of 8 Corps understood this perfectly, and he ordered the battered 101st Airborne Division, along with remnants of shattered armored units, to hold it at all costs. The 101st, commanded in the field by Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, arrived in Bastogne on December 19th under chaotic conditions, moving against a tide of retreating soldiers, many of whom shouted warnings that the Germans were right behind them. The paratroopers dug in around the town's perimeter in frozen ground that resisted every shovel stroke. Temperatures plunged well below zero. Ammunition was critically short. Medical supplies were nearly non-existent. Wounded men lay in makeshift aid stations with little more than bandages and prayer to protect them. By December 20th, the Germans had encircled Bastogne completely, cutting off every road and trapping the Americans inside a shrinking ring of cold snow and incoming artillery fire. It was in this context that Eisenhower made one of the most consequential command decisions of the entire war. On December 19th, 1944, he convened an emergency meeting of his senior commanders ever done. A city whose very name carried the weight of industrial-scale slaughter from the First World War. The atmosphere in that cold, damp room was heavy. Several officers entered with grim faces, fully aware that the situation was critical. But Eisenhower, determined to project confidence and control, opened the meeting with a remarkable statement. He told his generals that the present situation was to be regarded not as a disaster, but as an opportunity. The room went quiet. Then Eisenhower turned to the most flamboyant, most controversial, and most operationally aggressive general in the American Army, General George S. Patton, Jr., commander of the Third Army, and asked him how quickly he could turn his forces northward and attack to relieve Bastogne. What Patton said next stunned the room and entered the permanent record of military history. Patton calmly replied that he could attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. The other generals were incredulous. Turning an entire army, with its hundreds of thousands of men, its artillery, its supply lines, its communications networks, 90 degrees and launching an offensive in 48 hours was considered operationally impossible by virtually every professional military standard. But Patton had secretly begun planning to move days earlier, anticipating Eisenhower's need before the meeting even took place. He had already prepared 3 separate operational plans, each contingent on different scenarios, and his staff had worked through the night to preposition units. Patton was not bluffing. He was ready. And on December 22, 1944, exactly as promised, the 4th Armored Division of Patton's 3rd Army began its brutal push northward through snow-covered roads, freezing fog, and fierce German resistance toward the encircled garrison at Bastogne, a drive that would become one of the most celebrated armor relief operations in American military history. This is the moment in the story where we want to pause and ask you something important. And we mean this sincerely. If this kind of deep, cinematic, emotionally honest history resonates with you, please subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't already. Like this video to help more people find it, and share it with a friend or a family member who deserves to know these stories. Leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most so far, whether it's Patton's audacity, the isolation of the men at Bastogne, or the sheer scale of the German attack. Your engagement keeps this kind of storytelling alive. Inside Bastogne, the situation was becoming almost unbearable. On December 22nd, 4 German officers approached American lines under white flag and delivered a formal written ultimatum to General McAuliffe, demanding the honorable surrender of the encircled American forces to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. McAuliffe, exhausted and defiant, reportedly laughed when the message was read aloud. His written reply was a single word: nuts. The German officers, confused by the American slang, had to be told that it meant an unequivocal refusal. McAuliffe's response was transmitted across the Allied world and became an instant symbol of American resolve. But behind that one defiant word lay days of genuine suffering, soldiers with frostbitten feet wrapped in burlap, surgeons operating by flashlight, men sharing their last rations with wounded comrades, and every dawn bringing fresh artillery barges that shook the frozen earth and tested the human spirit to its absolute limit. Meanwhile, at the highest levels of Allied command, Eisenhower was navigating not just a military crisis, but a political and personal one. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who had been given temporary command of the northern shoulder of the Bulge, gave a press conference on January 7th, 1945, that infuriated the American commanders. Speaking with characteristic self-congratulation, Montgomery implied that it was primarily British leadership that had stabilized the Allied position, making little acknowledgement of the extraordinary sacrifices made by American soldiers and commanders. The episode nearly fractured the Allied coalition entirely. Eisenhower, under enormous pressure from American generals demanding Montgomery's removal, had to exercise every ounce of his legendary diplomatic skill to hold the alliance together while simultaneously managing the ongoing battle. It was a test of character that went far beyond tactics and terrain. It was about keeping men with enormous egos and competing national interests united in a common cause at the moment when unity mattered most. On December 26, 1944, the lead elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division finally broke through the German encirclement and reached Bastogne, ending the siege and securing one of the war's most iconic moments of relief. The Battle of the Bulge continued for weeks afterward, grinding through January 1945 in brutal cold and near-constant fighting, ultimately costing the United States approximately 75,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and captured, making it the bloodiest single battle in American history during the Second World War. Germany lost irreplaceable men, tanks, fuel, and aircraft that could never be replaced, accelerating the collapse that followed in the spring of 1945. Hitler's gamble had failed. The Ardennes offensive, rather than saving the Third Reich, had consumed its last reserves of offensive power. And the men who held Bastogne, who turned armies in 48 hours, who kept alliances intact under political fire, those men, named and unnamed, officer and enlisted, American and Allied, had looked into the worst that history could offer and refused to surrender. If this story moved you, please subscribe right now, like this video, share it with someone who needs to feel what real courage looks like, and leave a comment below telling us what part of this story you'll carry with you. because these men deserve to be remembered, and your voice is how that memory stays alive.